Today is the 10th of October 2014, and I thought that I might explore the fascination with paranormal. You know, why do people, need to speak to the dead, basically, or why do we feel the urge to speak to people who have passed on? Why do we need to contact people who've passed away, family, relatives, friends? And I thought what I might do in this sort of podcast is just... sorry, you'll have to excuse the noise. I'm actually kind of driving in heavy traffic at the moment. But I thought what I would do is just explore sort of, if you like, the psychology behind it, the reasons behind it, and probably from my own point of view as well. It's a deep subject. I think you could branch off into the religious side of it, the psychological side of it, the emotional side of it, if you like, the pure paranormal side, the scientific side, but I thought that I would just talk about things in general. Why not go into specifics too much? It's just my own thoughts, really. Start off really with why I get into it. I mean, I kind of got into the talking of spirits and such like initially came from my grandmother. My grandmother was a spirit medium, from what I can gather. A lot of my family don't actually seem to like talking about what my grandmother did, but I know she used to tell fortunes, she used to read the tarot cards, as far as I know, and I'm pretty sure, she used to be a contact. I know she used to hold seances, and I remember when I was young, a Ouija board was mentioned, and I was always fascinated by these things, and we're talking when I was probably 6, 7, 8 years old, and I was, because cutting a long story short, my parents had a lot of issues when I was younger, in my younger years, between themselves, and my mother and myself and my brother and sister used to spend quite a lot of time at my grandmother's, and so I got to know what was kind of going on, and I think I used to overhear quite a lot of conversations about my grandmother and what she used to do. So I do remember being fascinated with her house and apartments when I was younger. There was just something in or around her house and apartments that just fascinated me. And I think it was the first time that I kind of became aware that there was something more than just normal physical human beings there. I have seen ghost apparitions, and I've seen shadows, and I've had glimpses, into that side. Not so much when I was young, but kind of in my teens and 20s. I then got interested in the occult, and I'm still actually involved in the occult. I approached that with a very skeptical view in the beginning. I knew that a lot of these things were based on a very, very old religion. They were based on superstition and a lot of myths. Herbal lore is one thing that I studied, and obviously while going through that kind of learning process, etc., I was involved with quite heavily into tarot card readings, dowsing, crystal ball. Funnily enough, I never really went down the Ouija board route. I don't know why. And so I kind of got interested in there. So to me, speaking to spirits and, water spirits and people who'd passed away and all of those kind of things from a very early age just was part of my life. already. I didn't need to be introduced to it. It wasn't a new thing to me. And all the way through my life, I have spoken to spirits. So it's quite interesting when people discover that they can talk to spirits when they're older, and it becomes a whole new fascination for them. And I find that quite interesting because I've always had it around me. I've always been involved in talking to spirits. It's not a new thing to me. So it's kind of something that I just do on a daily basis and have done. What's fascinating in the recent years is the fact that you can document all of this now. It's much easier to document, and it's becoming easier to use technology to record the responses that you get. But anyway, that's diversifying. So I feel quite comfortable talking to spirits. Why do I do it? It's given me guidance. It's given me knowledge. It's given me confidence. It's given me a different outlook towards death. You know, even when I was young, other people used to say I was quite callous and heartless about death. And death to me isn't the end of your life. Well, it's the end of your physical life. But when somebody used to pass away and people were grieving like crazy, and I used to think, why are they crying? Those people haven't gone anywhere. Their physical body may have passed, gone, but their spirit, whatever you want to call it, their spirit, their soul or whatever, carries on. So I could never really understand when I was when I was young, why people used to get so upset. And people used to get really seriously upset about animals dying and things like that. And I'm not being heartless about somebody dying. Yes, it's upsetting when someone you love dies. There is a period of grief that you go through. But people, have committed suicide. They spend months being depressed. And I used to just think it was quite fascinating why people were so upset about somebody passing. The initial grief, fine, I can understand, but months or years later, I know people that are still grieving 20 to 30 years after their parents have died. And I used to think, well, why don't you speak to them then? To me, it's always been part of me, part of my nature, part of my life. And it wasn't till I really got into my 20s and my 30s that I sort of think, well, other people don't speak to spirits. It then began to dawn on me why people were grieving so much about losing, because they thought that was it. That was the end of that person's life. So, an interesting aspect to it, I guess, in a way. I believe now that people are more aware that you are able to speak to spirits. I think a lot of people were speaking to spirits before, but didn't really publicise the fact. They used to keep it to themselves because they were frowned upon, or used to be classed as weird, or, psycho, or, whatever it is. The old sort of thing about people saying they could hear voices in their head and all that. Well, people just get slapped as, being mad. Or schizophrenic or something, and it is actually quite interesting. So for me, it's kind of second nature. It's something that I've always done, and I now begin to understand a little bit more why people are fascinated by this subject. Because, if they have lost parents or friends or relations or whatever, and then they begin to realise, well, actually, you can actually speak to these people who have passed on. And, it's not such a weird thing to do anymore. So I think this is one of the reasons why people get into this. Because a lot of people, if you didn't know better, would just think, well, 60, 70, 80, 90 years on Earth is it. That's it in your body. And when you die, you die. You pass away, you rot, and turn back into dust again. And I suppose in a way, if you live like that through your whole life, thinking that this particular aspect of your life is it, this is all that you are, there is nothing beyond, then I guess your outlook on life is kind of different, really. I mean, that's just what I think. I'd be very interested to hear what other people's views. I mean, obviously, with the religious aspect in people's lives, where people think that they're going to go to hell or heaven, or in other religions they believe that something else is going to happen to them. I mean that's a whole different subject, really. I think from a psychological point of view, to actually be able to speak to people who have lived on Earth and passed on, it's reassuring to know that this life on Earth in this physical realm isn't the end of, isn't the be-all and end-all of everything. It's just a phase, or it's just a part of what you actually are. You do actually move on to another plane. There are lots of different levels, I guess, of being in a spirit, in the spirit world. And that, again, is another subject. But there is actually something beyond, your death. And that's kind of reassuring, really, to know that you can live your life here quite comfortably. And, if you do die of a terminal illness, or you get killed, or you have an accident, or, you die naturally, whatever, that's not just it. You have contact with people in the other realm, on the other astral plane, or whatever it is, heaven, whatever people want to call it, really. That there is actually something else beyond this physical life. The other reason why I think people like talking to spirits is for information. There is a knowledge seeking. It's not only the reassurance that there is something beyond this physical life, but that you can actually ask. You can actually ask someone who has lived before for advice, or for some facts about something, like, for instance, something that possibly happened in a house. Maybe somebody was murdered or killed or died or whatever in certain circumstances, that you've got the opportunity to go back and actually ask, if their spirit is still around, that you can actually ask that spirit, what happened? Information, questions. What do we do when we're talking to spirits all the time? We're asking questions all the time. Who are you? How old are you? How many of you are there? What happens if? What happens when? How did this happen? How did you die? Where did you die? When did you die? We are constantly asking questions because we are inquisitive and we have a thirst for knowledge. And if we can actually find out this information from people who have passed before us, then that's what we're thirsting for. So I think that's another aspect to the reason why it's becoming more acceptable, I think. It's becoming more acceptable because more people are doing it. More people are realising that you're not weird, you're not psycho, you're not, dealing with the devil and all of these other things that, seem to get plastered on the paranormal. And that, it will become, I think, as Steve Huff says, in 10 years' time, I think we're going to have devices that we're going to use like mobile phones. I think we will have a device that will basically press a button and that's it. You call someone up and you start talking to them. So I think it's actually quite interesting. If you think about the amount of knowledge and experience and such like that has gone on before us, yes, it's good to actually ask people who are alive, but sometimes those people are unapproachable, or they don't want to be questioned, or you don't have access to them, for instance. But of course, when they've passed on and they're in the spirit world, I mean, they're not, on-demand spirits by any means, but, you can actually build up a sort of paranormal relationship with your guardian angel, with your, if you like, your local spirits. And that becomes quite empowering to know that, you can call on the knowledge of people that have passed before. It's quite fascinating. It is actually quite fascinating. I think the other thing that's quite interesting about the whole, spirit realm, paranormal activity, etc., is that I think it's becoming socially accepted that ghosts do exist. I think, although we're still not allowed to say that they do. This is the strangest thing that I find. Any of the programs that you find on TV about paranormal, they always have to have a caveat saying this is for entertainment purposes only. Well, quite clearly it's not entertainment. But, for legal reasons, people have to say it's for entertainment purposes only. No one can actually say that ghosts exist, or that spirits exist, or that we're actually even communicating with spirits. I find that whole aspect to it quite odd. But I guess until the authorities or the people in the know start to recognise the fact that, that scientifically there is a spirit world that exists and we can communicate with it, I guess we'll still have to continue saying that it's for entertainment purposes only. Another eye-opener, I think, for a lot of people is, I know when you're young, when you're a child, and people start talking about ghosts and things. I mean, you kind of, in a way, only sort of think that there's only one. That a haunted house or whatever only has one ghost, and of course that's actually not true. I can at any one time, when I have a session in my house, for instance, can have, I think the most I've had so far is about 11. And then, typically there's kind of 4, 5, 6, sometimes there's only one. And that's also a bit of an eye-opener, and I think that's also becoming more socially acceptable, probably through the publicity of these TV programs, that, people go into a building, for instance, like a hospital or a police station or, what they used to call psycho wards or something like that. Some of these places that people were tortured or killed, or there are more than one or two spirits around, and that probably they are, well, I believe they are everywhere. I think think of it along the lines of, as a human being in a body, there are places that you would like to go and there are places that you wouldn't like to go. I'm driving on a motorway at the moment. I can't actually really imagine any spirits really wanting to be on a motorway, just as I wouldn't physically want to be anywhere on a motorway other than in a vehicle. But I do believe that you could pretty much go anywhere, like a lake or a field, or somewhere that's relatively quiet, and talk to spirits. I mean, they're not limited by their physical body. I don't know whether they have limits. Maybe that's a question to ask. So yeah, it is interesting. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast. Maybe you can leave some comments below about your thoughts about what I've been speaking about here now. And it's an interesting subject, and I think everybody finds their own purpose or their own reason for talking to spirits, and that's what makes it interesting. It's an open subject that is available to everyone, and everyone will do it in their own way. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up. As I say, thank you very much for listening to this much, and I look forward to doing another podcast, maybe on a different subject.